Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Larry Hennessy, and I'm Senior VP here at TAB. We'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar, Asking the Right Questions. This is the first in a series of webinars where we isolate and focus on the most critical concepts and issues relative to the practical applications of ratings in your day-to-day business practices. Our presenter today is Enza Coyote. Enza is President and CEO of Smart Media. She is also TAB's lead consultant on the ratings portion of the TAB OAAA out-of-home professional training curriculum. At the end of the, you could type in questions as you go, but we won't be able to answer them until the end of the presentation. So please type in any questions you may have into your the appropriate spot on your dashboard. Okay, and we'll try to answer as many as we can in the allotted time that we have, which is an hour. Okay, Enza, you want to get started?
Sure, let's get started. I typically try to do these as very interactive. So unfortunately, because there are so many of us on the line at one time, like Larry said, please do type in those questions. I can't emphasize enough that asking them or putting them down in writing as you think of them is probably the most important thing, so you don't forget about them, and we want to make sure that we address them. But the concept of today's webinar is really focused about asking the right questions. Our industry has really, we played catch-up for so many years in terms of trying to make sure that we provide a rating system and a metric system that's comparable to other media that's out in the marketplace. And we have that measurement system with the TAB out-of-home ratings. But we have to really get beyond just having those numbers available to start using them and truly understanding how they can help us be consultative with our clients versus just kind of saying, okay, we have a new number, let's slap that on a proposal, let's slap that on a flow chart and give that off to our client. We really have to change our focus and the vocabulary that we discuss out of home with our clients about so that we have these types of conversations that can really make a big difference. The goal of the webinar is really very basic. There's 5 questions that you really have to have answers to before you go off and try to make a recommendation or craft a proposal for a client. This webinar is going to be focused on helping you get to the answers for those 5 basic questions and should last about 30 minutes in terms of the actual content, and we should have more than enough time to go through some of the questions. The whole focus of this is that because we now have metrics, and we didn't have them for a number of years, but we've had them really for almost the past 5 years, you have to start asking some very different questions. You cannot sit back and say, oh, okay, you want that specific location or you want those handful of locations, let me pull those for you, and oh, by the way, here's what the numbers deliver. It has to really go way beyond that because clients are making a concerted effort and decision to spend money. And the reason why they're spending money, and they need to understand who it is that they're targeting, how are they going to use that money to its best advantage, where to spend that money, and really ultimately how much money are they going to spend to achieve some sort of a goal. We have to help them understand how out-of-home can be a part of answering those questions and a solution to any of their marketing challenges that they may face. And it's not about throwing locations at a client and saying, these are the best locations ever. If you don't have some very basic information from them, you can't say things like that to a client. How do you know that these are the best units? It's not just because they're a bargain or they happen to be available. They have to make relevant sense to them in the context of what it is a client's trying to achieve. There's 5 basic questions, as I said, and each one of them really plays off of the other ones. And they answer some very basic questions that allow us to have the conversations moving forward. We're going to talk about the who, where, what, when, and how much. And for those of you who remember English, you remember any time that we were starting any kind of an essay or we were writing anything or putting forth a story to tell, you had to have these kinds of answers to these basic questions. And it's the same thing now in advertising and within out-of-home. The 5 basic questions are really pretty simple. The last 2 we're not going to focus too much on when we talk about the when, which is the time period that a client is going to advertise in, and then of course how much in terms of a budget, which we know is ultimately probably the most difficult one to get an answer to. Clients for some reason don't like to share what their budget parameters are up front, but if you can get that information, it's important. We're really going to focus on those first 3 that answer the who, where, and what. These seem somewhat fundamental. Who's your target? What kind of market do you want to advertise in? What kind of goals are you looking to accomplish? But we haven't really had to ask these in the past. In the past, it was kind of like, well, you know, what do you want to spend? Or what kind of showing level do you want? These really get delved into much more specifics in terms of helping us understand what a client's situation is going to be. So let's jump right in and talk about the who, the demographics piece of this. Just as a reminder, all of our metrics provide ratings against a really very large, wide selection of demographic profiles made up of age, gender, household income, as well as ethnicity. It's very few clients that want to target just adults 18 plus. And we have to stop being lazy about just saying, okay, fine, I'm going to report these numbers against adults 18 plus. All advertisers, whether they're local or whether they're national, have a consumer that will be interested in their product or in their services. And they are identified by unique characteristics. Some of those characteristics are, as I said, the age and gender, et cetera, the demographic profile. So we can now provide information against a characteristic profile that the that the client is interested in. And that's going to give them the added benefit of feeling more confident that we understand what they're looking for and confidence in understanding how our units stack up against a specific demo. It's absolutely important to understand it because theoretically you should have potentially somewhat of a different program if you are looking for women 18 to 49 with a household income 150,000 plus versus African American versus potentially just general women 18 to 49, whatever it may be. You may have different units that you want to recommend to a client based on that profile. This demo is really important in terms of how these numbers are going to be reported. Let's take an example where I know a lot of times when I've dealt with people, everyone loves to show that adult 18 plus number. What you're looking at on the screen right now is just a chart, and it's a 4-week number, and we have impressions and we have a reach number against adults 18 plus and then against adults 25 to 54, household income 75,000 plus. They're very different. A lot of us like to automatically say, well, look, I can give you almost 10 million impressions with those units that I've selected. That sounds really great. But if you have a client that has a high-end product service, what good does that tell them if you're just giving them 10 million impressions against adults 18 plus? It makes us seem very mass and only mass-oriented. Do not get me wrong. We are a mass vehicle. We do target and we provide reach across a large population base, not just highly defined demographics. However, in order to be able to work with clients, being able to give them the number that's almost 3 million against their specified demographic is much more powerful than telling them that you're getting 10 million general market types of impressions. The other thing to really note is that when you're dealing with an actual percentage, a reach number, a unique number of people that are going to be exposed to the message, if you're doing your job correctly, whether as a buyer or as a seller, the panels that you're selecting may over-deliver or should over-deliver against the demographic that the client has requested. In this case, the selection of units that I had come up with reached 13% of adults 18 plus, but reached 15% of adults 25 to 54, household income 75,000 plus. Again, with a client that may have a higher end price point on one of their products or services, it's much more powerful to discuss with them against that demographic profile than it is against general market. The other thing is, too, is this allows us to be compared to other media. If we're just providing adult 18 plus impressions or adult 18 plus information, the client can't then look at our medium as it relates to other media that's out there. So they can't compare it to TV, to radio, to internet, to anything else. It's important for you to work with the client to determine what exactly their demographic profile is for those compatibility issues, those consistency issues that we need to deal with. Now, if we think about it from an impact on the unit selection, I've kind of alluded to this. Because we are able to break down how our impressions skew against different demos, we don't only have to rely on the physical location of a unit to determine if it does well against a demographic. I mean, how many times have we all said, well, if we look at the population density of affluent adults in the neighborhood, these 4 or 5 units or this package of shelters or these package of street furniture may be the best ones against the demographic of upscale adults. Well, we don't need to say things like that anymore. You can actually prove that out with the metrics. There's no more guessing. The other thing that I really like about being able to look at it against a demographic profile is how many times the client just had their heart set on a unit. That's just the unit that they want, whether it's the premier unit on the highway that they feel like that's where they're going to get the most bang for their buck. But you may be able to provide ammunition to show how another unit or a series of 2 or 3 other units provide even more value against the demographic profile that they've selected. So being able to do that puts more power in our hands to understand the value of units against demographic profiles. Again, the last point on this slide is absolutely critical. Being able to provide the information on a demographic profile allows us to be measured alongside other media. And most clients, whether they're local or national, again, we have limited dollars. Media is all vying for those limited dollars. We want to be able to have and be in those conversations alongside the other media that could potentially take that money away from out of home and be reallocated to radio or TV. So what happens if the client doesn't give you a demographic profile? You've asked and the client just kind of gives you a blank look, like, I'm not really sure, what do you mean? I mean, we have to remember that clients aren't really yet used to thinking about out of home as having all of these numbers and having all of these numbers available against different demographic profiles. So we have got to all get on the same page, pushing the information to them and helping them understand that it is available. Let's figure out which are the right demographic profiles to take a look at. So if you can't get a demographic profile on your first round, don't default to adult 18 plus just as again, as a default. Let's take some educated guesses. Let's make some statements to the client to see if it makes some sense. It could be as simple as, well, I know that the price point on your particular product or service is quite, on the higher end. Would you want to consider looking from these numbers against a more affluent demographic than more general market? Or it could be an alcohol brand, a liquor brand. You know what? You know that they need to look at legal drinking age. It's at least 21 plus, but maybe they're doing something a little bit more younger. So you may want to look at 21 to 34. But think about what the product is. Think about what the client has told you, even though they may not have said, this is my specific demographic profile, to see if you can come up with some guesses and run those by the client. There's a couple of other ways that you can go about getting and determining some demographics that the client may be interested in. If there's competitors in the marketplace, who are they looking at? You can provide that level of information to the client and say, look, I know that the hospital university down the street may be looking at adults 35 plus. Is that something that you're interested in? Are you competitive with them? You can throw out questions like that to see if you can gut out who potentially is their core demographic group. The other thing is if the client is buying other media, they will have demographic profiles for that other media. They are not buying against households. They're not buying against adults 18 plus for TV and radio. They are buying against the demo. So if they are buying the other media, ask them that question. It's basically about using your judgment and using conversational qualities to get the information you need from the client. Do not go back to adults 18 plus as your default. There's no reason to do that. So now we're going to go to the second question, the where. And this is from a standard geographic market definition. And this is pretty, this is one of the biggest differences for us now moving forward, is that we have the ability to differentiate and define our markets based on consistent boundaries. It's no longer about, well, it's where someone has inventory, or maybe it's just the core kind of city area. There are different ways to look at a geographic market, but they are standardized. And that helps tremendously when people need to compare things. Again, it's all about making out-of-home easier to buy and then therefore easier to compare, not only to other media, but even within itself. As a buyer, I want to be able to compare proposals between my operators. And the best way to be able to do that is if I have standardized ways of evaluating it, standardized ways being geographically and demographically. Before we move forward on this where piece of it, I just want to quickly review again what the media market definitions are. There are two of them that we work with on a daily basis. We have the DMA, the Designated Market Area, and that's used predominantly by national advertiser, and it's a pretty large area. There's about 210 of these boundaries, if you will, or markets in the United States. And they cover the metropolitan area, but then they add in multiple counties that are surrounding it. It is very much a Nielsen-defined geographic area, and a lot of clients report their sales figures on DMA. So if you are dealing with national clients, this probably becomes a really big point for them to be able to look at a DMA comparison versus some sort of made-up geographic market. The second one is the CBSA, or the Core-Based Statistical Area. Just know that this replaces what the old MSA was, the Metropolitan Statistical Area. It is, again, the major core city with the boundaries of counties that commute into the city. That's pretty much how they're tied together. And this is, again, a government-based geographic boundary. It is typically our default geography, and I'm going to emphasize the typically because there's a lot of reasons why you may not want to look at this. But if somebody is buying radio, they're probably looking for you to give them information based on the CBSA. Demos have a huge impact on the way that numbers are reported, but geography has an equally, if not greater, impact on the way that units are selected. Just remember, again, we want to be comparable. We want to be able to kind of compare things, so it's important that we have these standardized definitions. But any of our metrics, GRPs and reach and frequency specifically, have to be reported against a specific geographic area. Whether it is the DMA or the CBSA, it has to be reported that way. And that geography will have an impact on how those numbers are reported. If we just focus on a geographic market where, say, an operator has inventory, or we make assumptions that the client just wants to look at a smaller geographic area, we are shortchanging ourselves in a number of ways. Why make guesses when you can simply ask the client, how do you want to evaluate the program that we are proposing or recommending, pulling together for you? Do you want to look at it against that DMA basis, or do you want to look at it against the CBSA? All of those ratings are going to be directly linked to not only the demographic, but to the geographic universe that we ultimately select. As an example, if we look at Memphis as a market, what you're looking at on the screen right now, you have the yellow area, which is the CBSA, and then you have the much larger DMA, which is the green plus the yellow. And on the side, what we have is just the populations and how they vary between the DMA and the CBSA. In the DMA of Memphis, there's almost 1.4 million total adults. In the CBSA, there's a little over 1 million. Think about if you have a unit or two and you are now measuring how that unit does based on impressions, based on GRPs, based on reach and frequency, if you're looking at a 1.4 million population versus a 1 million population. Big difference. And in some markets, it's even bigger in terms of the actual difference between what the DMA and the CBSA population is. Now let's kind of go back to our example that we were looking at earlier. We were talking about this, or I was talking about this, a client who is looking to potentially buy some higher skewing units to a more affluent demographic. So if we're looking at the Memphis market, and let's say it's adults 18 to 49. I'm going to keep it simple. Let me backtrack for a minute. We're going to keep it simple. We're going to say it's adults 18 to 49. And they want 125 weekly points against adults 18 to 49. Your next question has to be, what geographic area is that? Because it will have a huge impact on the numbers. So if a client is asking me to do 125 weekly TRPs against adults 18 to 49, but they ask it for the CBSA, it takes me on average about 10 units to do that. However, and again, it's common sense. If we go back to the geographic actual boundaries, if they're asking me to deliver 125 points, but over this green and yellow shaded area, I need more units to do that. I need 16 units to deliver those weekly TRPs. Why would you want to guess that? One, if the client, I'm all for we want to sell more out of home, but if the client is really only evaluating the CBSA, it's imperative that you understand that that's what you're building your proposal and your recommendation against. I don't want you to get too caught up in this chart, but I do want to make a note here real quick, again, going back to the demographic piece of it. So we know that the client wanted adults 18 to 49, but let's say they selected the CBSA. And that adults 18 to 49 has a huge implication, again, versus just saying, well, I'm going to give them my larger number of adults 18 plus. 125 TRPs against adults 18 to 49 deliver all of these different metrics. The translation to that against adults 18 plus is actually only 120 TRPs. I'm not going to get into all of the back and forth math. We have plenty of learning material for you to go through so that you understand some of those concepts. The critical piece of this that I want you to understand is how much it influences what you ultimately pull together for your clients by knowing what the demographic and the geographic boundaries are. The other piece of it is, again, going down to that plan reach. If we go down a couple of lines and you look at the percentage, if I was buying these units, these 10 units that deliver 125 weekly TRPs, I'm delivering almost 59% reach against the demographic that the client has identified in the CBSA. Going back to my earlier point, if I just did adults 18 plus, it's 56. Hey, look, 3 percentage points are enough of a difference. Don't shortchange yourself. Ask the client what it is that they're looking for. The other thing that I want to make sure that everyone notes is on the bottom between the target in-market impressions and the total target impressions, the difference between those two numbers. Remember, your in-market impressions are against the demo that lives within the boundaries you've defined. So it's only against adults 18 to 49 that live within the CBSA, whereas the total target is all adults 18 to 49 impressions that the unit generates regardless of where they live. It just accounts for that to and through traffic. So how do you determine the geographic market? First, let's make a quick note. The geographic market is not the same as a client telling you they have an area of coverage that they're interested in. Selecting a geographic market means that you are consciously selecting either that DMA or that CBSA definition. And then a client may tell you, well, you know what, I kind of want the downtown area, or I want to focus somewhere near that hospital or that university or the shopping area. Those are areas of coverage that the client may give you on top of the definition of a market. Just remember that the market is the baseline. That has to be what you're originally measuring against, and then you can help to select units that answer to that client's geographic coverage piece of it. Now, the CBSA, as I said, is typically an out-of-home default geography because the DMA is quite large. But please don't assume. Always make sure that you ask what the client wants. And if they need an explanation, you can quickly provide it. If they're still a little confused, ask them, are you comparing this to any other media format? Are you comparing it to TV? Are you comparing it to radio? I can give it to you in both. I can easily do a quick translation of the same exact schedule, running it against both the DMA as well as the CBSA. And in some instances, that may be necessary. But the most important thing is to continually ask the client, having that conversation with them, what's important to you? How do you want to or need to evaluate these numbers when it comes to geography? Just a quick note. If you're working in a local market, whether you are a buyer or a seller, it's really important that you understand the boundaries of those markets. Because while generally speaking, the CBSA is smaller than the DMA, you have some anomalies out there. Florida has got some strange boundaries. And again, I don't need to focus too much on all of this, but the CBSA is actually bigger than the DMA from a population standpoint. Because what's happening is you have West Palm Beach that's part of the CBSA, but once you start breaking out a DMA, it's its own DMA. I don't want you to get too focused on this. The point that I'm trying to make is that you need to become familiar with the way that the market geographies are laid out for markets that you buy a lot or markets that you're selling in. So we've just gone through the who and we've gone through the where, and now we're going to talk about the what in terms of audience delivery. Everything is in regards to an audience. When we talk about goals, we are talking about articulating what the client wants from a delivery standpoint. And you can't do this unless you have that audience and that geo defined. Again, think about that example. 125 points in a DMA is very different than 125 points in a CBSA, and it's very different depending on the demo that you're looking for. Because our audience delivery helps us articulate how much emphasis the client wants to place on reach and frequency, it's important for them to give you this kind of information. And actually setting this type of delivery is really difficult. Clients go through quite a bit of analysis and proprietary systems that they may have to develop it. There's a lot of tools that they have to do this, and they're all analytical in nature. So it's important that, again, we provide them the information that they're requesting from a TRP standpoint based on the universe that is relevant for them. Our TAB ratings allow us to answer this question right now. Because when we're expressing something as a weight level, what the client is looking to do is determine how many TRPs they want, whether on a weekly basis or on a 4-week basis, or on a planned basis. They are setting goals up for themselves. And right now, we're kind of in a transition phase. Everyone's trying to determine what the benchmarks are, because that's the question I always get from everyone. Well, what do you think is a good benchmark? Is it 125 weekly points? Is it 150 points? You know what? That's something that as an industry will grow and we'll start to evaluate, but my big answer is it really depends on the client. Some clients are more than comfortable with 125 points a week based on what their marketing programs need to be, versus another client may need a higher level or what other media that they're buying. But regardless, they have this information and you need to work with them to get the answer. What's the goal that they're working to? Now, typically the larger clients will focus on the GRP conversation. They will focus on asking you for 150 points, 125 points, 200 points, whatever it may be. When you're working with some of your more local clients, some of them may be working with the same exact type of measurement system from a weight level perspective, especially if they're buying other local media. So don't make the assumption that just because they're local clients that they are not going to be asking you for this. If they are evaluating other media, they will evaluate you on a TRP basis as well. But the other thing that they can do is they can establish a communication goal. You know what sounds really great? If I could reach 50% of the audience that I need to, that would be a great plan for me. So getting it as expressed either as a reach or as a TRP works just as well. But you have to ask the question from them, what makes sense for you? What are you trying to do? A quick aside. The average number of units to achieve a goal is going to vary dramatically depending on what the goal is, right? It's just common sense. So if we just focus on the top part of this chart, it's still adults 18 to 49. We have Memphis as the CBSA, and we also have Memphis as the DMA. If the client requested 150 points in Memphis, if it was against the CBSA, it takes 11 units. If it's against the DMA, it takes 20 units. We've already covered that piece of it, but this holds true depending on the number of TRPs that they're asking for, or if they're asking for it on a reach level. Obviously, the higher the TRP that they're requesting, the more units it's going to take. And it will vary not only by demographic, it will vary by market. Again, think about the size of the markets that we're talking about, Memphis versus San Francisco. To achieve the same TRP value will take a very different number of units to accomplish that. So the bottom line is, don't guess. You have to talk with the client to determine what ultimately they're looking to accomplish so you can pull together the units and make a recommendation based on what they are trying to accomplish. Now the question again is, so what do you do when the client doesn't give you this? They come to you and they say, you know what, I want to buy some out of home. Great, what do you want to buy? I don't know, I think I want to buy some units next to that university and next to that shopping area. What do you got? And try to reframe that conversation can be somewhat difficult, but thinking about what you've learned and the things that you know about the metrics can help you potentially reframe that into giving you a little bit more direction. Obviously, first ask, is there a goal? Is there a weight level that you're looking to accomplish, whether it's a TRP or a reach level? Specifically ask the question. I know it sounds kind of, simplistic, but not many of us are doing that. So ask that. If they are still a little unsure, well, I'm not really sure. I don't know. I'm not really sure how much activity I should buy. Then you can work backwards to get to that answer. Maybe go and look at what they've done in the past. Have they bought some advertising with you in the past? And rerun that kind of activity to understand what it is that they delivered against the specific geographic and the demographic audience to create that universe. So run the past buys. Maybe they have a whole budget that they need to work with, and having the budget allows you to work backwards to tell them what they can afford. Now, a CPM and a cost per point conversation, we're going to save that for another day. We're going to save that potentially for some instructional videos that we're going to develop after this webinar that will pick out specific topics that we're covering today and go into them in more detail, because it would take too long to do that on the phone right now. But the pass by one is probably the easiest one to talk about real quick. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, the client had originally, either last year or a couple years ago, they bought a 25 showing of posters. And now they're looking to you and they come back and they say, yeah, I think I kind of want to buy some more advertising. And you're going to be the good person and you're going to say, well, what kind of weight level do you want? What goal do you want to achieve? And they're like, I don't know. And what you can do is you can go back and say, well, last year you bought 42 units. And you can translate those 42 units to understand how they delivered to the demographic and the geographic profile. So there's the who and the where that we're going to answer. So it's the target audience of adults 18 to 49. We're going to look, I'm just throwing out a new market in there, Phoenix, and it's going to be against the CBSA. And when I translate those 42 units, it equals 102 weekly TRPs, and that equates to a 49% reach of adults 18 to 49 over a 4-week period. That's a benchmark. That's something that you could use to tell the client, well, this is what you've bought in the past. Does this make sense moving forward? The biggest piece of it are the last two questions on this slide. Was the client truly satisfied with the buy that they did? Was there some tweaks that maybe you could make? Maybe they need to go up from 102 weekly points. Maybe it's 125, maybe 150 points. There's ways to continue to have that conversation to try to gauge how much maybe more they're willing to spend or what it is that they're looking to accomplish. If they feel like they had a great base plan but they could improve it a little bit, that gives you the ability to go up higher than where they were. The bottom line is you have to have answers to a series of questions before you even start to look at your avails or before you start looking at the proposals that all of the operators have provided you and make a recommendation to the client. You have to know what you're asking for. You have to know the who, you have to know the where, and you have to know the what. Budget, as I said, is absolutely critical and important, but if you can get the answer. So if we get these types of conversations going by remembering these five very simple, very basic types of questions, I think that if we keep these in mind, you will get to a different point with your clients, a different relationship in having conversations with them about things that are relevant to them, not to us as an industry, but that's relevant to a client. My viewpoint has always been that if you put the client first, and you deal with their situation and their challenge versus what your needs are, what you're trying to push, you will ultimately come out a winner more so than if you're just constantly looking at the inventory you need to sell or, you know what, I kind of like that unit, I want to sell that unit. It's important to come at it from the client's perspective and not what anyone else's needs are. Now, the other thing is that you could have, this chart could be, or this slide you could have handy, and you can always make sure that you check these off to make sure you have the information. But you know what? Maybe you could even do a client brief, which is a more of a template type of format that gives you, well, make sure that you have all of the relevant information in one spot. This is just a sample. We've had this in a lot of our materials from the TAB that you can use. It's just a template. The more important piece is that there's a ton of information on here that you are trying to get from the client, or that a buyer working with a client will look to answer before they issue an RFP to you. It's important because it saves off a lot of the back and forth. Oh, I forgot that question. Oh, I forgot that question. This puts everything in one spot. So whether you use this template or whether you use a different one, having something like that, some sort of grid that's always like, you know what, as soon as the client calls you, let me make sure that I'm writing down what the who, what, where, and how much and the time period is, that becomes the critical piece of information. A few other things that I want to leave you with before we go to any questions. Most importantly is when you start a campaign, whether you are proposing one or you're evaluating one or you're making the request for one, please make sure that you always select your geographic area and your demographic universe space. It has to be, what demo am I looking at and against what market definition is it, the CBSA or the DMA? A few other things that I always try to leave people with. You can add impressions and TRPs. You can always add them, but they have to be against that same universe base. That's why it's so critical. So let's say as a buyer, I'm buying from operator A and operator B, but now I want to add those two units together. That's great. I can totally do that as long as I have that consistent universe base. It's absolutely critical to look at it that way. The other thing is that when you do have reach numbers for individual units, do not add them together. You cannot do that. That has to be done on a platform or software system such as the TAB ADS system or on a Telmar system where you can add your individual units together to get a combined reach frequency. Always make sure that you're double checking your time periods. Anytime that you're doing any kind of calculations, make sure that you're really well versed in whether it's a weekly number, a 4-week number, a plan number. It's absolutely critical, especially when you're doing some kinds of calculation with any of the dollars. There's something called composition on there. Don't use that as a reach number. This will be a separate topic that we'll address probably through another webinar when we talk about composition. And also the other thing, there's really two things. Don't say that impressions equal the number of people seeing the message. I hear that a lot from people, and that's not correct. That's actually the reach number. That's the unique views that a campaign receives. When you talk about impressions, that has duplication in there, so it's the total exposure of the campaign, either by unit or by campaign. It's all of the views, and it has duplication. I could see it 10 times. Someone else could see it 5 times. That's 15 impressions. Out of 10 people, if only 2 of us saw it, that's a reach of 20. So you see how the numbers vary. And then you should understand the difference between in-market and total. And the reason why I make a big deal about this is because people like to use the larger number, and the total number is going to be larger. But as soon as you are reporting things like reach and frequency and TRPs, that's against an in-market population. In-market being the demo and the geographic area that you've defined. So if you are providing a client with reach, frequency, and GRPs and then give them the total impressions, it's technically incorrect. You should be giving them the in-market, and if you want, give them the second one too as a basis. Before I go off into the resources, there's a few things as I kind of go through all of my notes that I wanted to make sure that we kind of go through. The thing about demographics is on any of the systems that we're on, you can choose more than one demographic at a time. So let's say you're unsure, and you think the client wants an upscale audience, but you're not 100% positive. You could run 5 demographics in the same amount of time it takes you to run 1. So do it. Just do it, and this way you can give the client as much information as you need to be able to answer any kinds of questions. There's a lot of resources online at the TAB website. Just know that we have some e-learning materials where we have 2 specific e-learning modules that deal with the audience measurements, how it was developed, and the terms that I've been throwing out, like reach and frequency and TRPs. There is a video module on there that will take you through all of those definitions, and I highly recommend that you go through those. There's also other materials that you can use for training purposes that are available on there, with more that are going to be uploaded in the coming months as we develop it. If you have suggestions on topics that you would like covered in a series of webinars like this, let us know, because we would love to be able to get things from the market, from the field, and your day-to-day operations on topics that you may find of interest or challenges that you're facing using these numbers. We have some in our head, but we would love to get them from you. And let us know what you think about this webinar in general. It would be great to have that kind of feedback. So you can either, and this webinar has actually been recorded, so if you ever need to go back, it's on the website, and you can access that as well. If you need anything, you can always feel free to reach out to Larry Hennessy, and he will direct your questions, or you can feel free to reach out to me directly. My email address is pretty simple. It's Enza, E-N-Z-A, @smart, S-M-R-T, media, M-E-D-I-A.net, and I'd be happy to help you. So we're going to see if we have any questions, and then we're going to address them.
Okay, our first question here is about the who question, and it has to do with a non-traditional sort of verbiage on when some people are asking for a specific demographic. So what do you do if the client or agency says they're looking specifically for active, healthy lifestyle adults in a market, as opposed to, say, a specific age group or a specific gender, et cetera?
Great question. When you start talking about lifestyle characteristics, that becomes an even in more depth characteristic, obviously, of a client, of a demographic profile. But underneath all of that, there is a demographic profile that the client is looking for. If they're looking for active and healthy, that's great. But are they looking for active and healthy 55-year-olds? Are they looking for active and healthy 49-year-olds? They have something in mind that will, from a demographic standpoint, define who it is that they're trying to target. So that becomes the question that needs to be asked, again, directly to them. The lifestyle piece, at some point, we hope to be able to add those types of filters onto it. But right now, we have these buying demos that are relatable to other media.
Okay. The next question is pretty simple. What is a TRP versus a GRP?
Ah, my favorite one. Okay, so TRP is target rating points and GRP is gross rating points. They're basically used interchangeably. GRPs, the technical definition of the GRPs is against an adult 18+ audience, whereas TRP, or target rating points, is against a specific target audience, T for target. But really, when I started in the industry, there was only GRPs. Then we started moving to TRPs, and people use them interchangeably.
Okay. And this is from someone who's been in radio for a long time. They're actually asking for the definition of a showing, in quotes.
I couldn't even begin to address that question because the definition of showing really was very different depending on the market that you were in, by operator in some cases, even within the same market. The concept was an attempt by the industry to put some kind of metrics behind delivering 25 daily rating points. That's the perfect definition of a showing. However, that really did become bastardized over the years, and some people were using different numbers to calculate it. There was inconsistency in the geographic base, so it really doesn't have too much meaning. So when a client is asking you for showings, my biggest word of advice would be, oh, we don't really sell that way anymore. We are selling by GRPs and TRPs the way that you're used to buying other media. What kind of weight level would you like based on that?
Right. And this is a question just about standard media markets in general. Basically, the question is, if I'm in a rural area and I'm not centered around a local community market, I may be on the lines of a different media markets. What do I do in that specific instance when neither the CBSA or the DMA really represents my inventory very well?
So from an inventory standpoint, I always, again, put it back to, so there's two different scenarios here. The first scenario is, let's take it from the standpoint of when you're selling to a client, what are they interested in? Are they only interested in that particular rural area and that county, potentially, that those units are located in? If that's the case, you do have the ability to run the numbers on individual counties. So while I didn't really discuss it in this webinar, you can go down to individual counties. There's also some custom markets that are available in there that have different defined different defined geographic areas. So you can always look at it on an individual county basis if that's what the client wants. However, if it's just because it's where you have inventory, I would take a look at it across the larger geographic base of a CBSA, just because, one, I understand it may be more rural, but you do have people driving in and out of those different markets, and it would be a shame not to include those impressions in there.
Right.
And that's what you would do if you only looked at the county. You're only going to be reporting impressions by the people who live in those small counties. You want to know everyone that's going through.
Right. And that's I think you touched on this, but as just to reinforce it, total impressions account for everybody viewing inventory. If you have one display in a rural location or two displays in a rural location, a lot of times showing a GRP for that wouldn't be very meaningful in the first place. So selling based on total impressions there is a completely valid way, and it's a way that's accounted for in the system. So shouldn't be too big of a problem. This one is maybe more for Larry and Joe, which is when will bus and light rail data be available?
It'll be available later this year.
Okay.
I think you skipped a question. There's somebody who asked about adults 25 to 54 with a household income qualifier on there. That's available now, as far as I'm aware, on the ADS system.
Yes.
And I believe if you are accessing it via Telmar, that their next release, which should be happening shortly, also has those added definitions on there. Just so that you know, when we went from version 1 to version 2.0 in June, we went from 90 combined definitions of demos available to us to over 240. So most of them are going to be in there. If there's something that's not, let us know.
Okay. This is a pretty common question that I get as well. What if an advertiser asks for the DMA and the particular operator doesn't cover the entire DMA? They may be focused in 1 or 2 counties in an 18-county DMA. So when they give them that level in that DMA, they're ultimately going to be offering them a very highly concentrated package. So what would you do in that?
What would you do? You said you got this all the time.
I often explain that there's a difference between saying that I'm covering an entire DMA when I sell versus showing what a rating point is, which is this is the X number of impressions versus the population of the market. Also, just because you're not located in a particular county or set of counties doesn't mean that people from outside of that county aren't seeing that your inventory. There's a lot of great out-of-home inventory that's reaching a lot of people from a lot of places in a market.
I mean, the thing that this also sets up, and it is a much bigger conversation, and I noticed that on the question it says maybe we need to do a separate webinar on this, and this is part of the instructional video series that we do want to do, because this is a very important question. It is very real that you may not deliver to a client's goal if you happen to not have inventory across the entire DMA and it's a large DMA. And that shouldn't stop you from going forward and still supplying your inventory based on the demographic profile if you've got the right kinds of units. It's up to the client and the buyer to then determine maybe they need multiple operators to achieve the goal that they want. And I know that doesn't sometimes sit well with everyone on the operator side, but that is what moves our industry forward, because it shows that, look, when I buy TV or if I buy radio, I'm very rarely just buying TBS. I'm also looking at other networks. I'm looking at other radio stations to combine to do what I want to accomplish in the market. So we would do the same thing in out-of-home. It may take multiple operators if I truly want to cover the DMA. The other question I have for that client who wants the information on the DMA basis is that how you're evaluating it, or is that how you truly want to buy it? Because some instances they may want to evaluate information on a DMA basis because they're looking at TV or they're looking at their sales figures and they need the numbers translated and reported against the DMA, but they may be perfectly happy looking at it on a CBSA to actually buy it. And I can't tell you how many times I've provided a client with multiple I mean, it's the same exact slide, but I've translated it to 5 demographic groups and 2 different geographic areas, just so that I have my bases covered in the way that I potentially need to look at the information.
Because we touched on cost per point, but that can be a very important metric for a client. And even though you're not covering the entire DMA, your cost per point is going to be able to be compared to another person's or another medium's cost per point. In this case, it would probably be TV if you're talking about the DMA. So they could just see that what you're offering is more cost effective in that regard. Even though if you were truly to deliver the number of GRPs they may buy with another medium, you may have a extremely high frequency and a very low reach because you don't have the coverage area. But that CPP could still be very telling in a good way for our industry and medium. Okay, so this is a question about the cross-tabulating the demographics with the ADS system. I imagine that's not just the standard demographics that we have in there. It has to do with maybe psychographics or the cross-tabulation kind of different types of demographics, things like that.
Well, yeah, I need to make sure that we're going to answer the question right. If we're talking about, right now we can't cross-tab. We don't have the ability to cross-tab. If you're used to working with MRI, let's say, or some other research where you can actually kind of put together your own demographic profile, we don't yet have that capability. But again, remember that we have over 240 profiles that we can run the information against. So that's pretty broad. If we are then talking about adding any kind of those lifestyle characteristics, that's something that is on the table for us to consider as an industry, adding things like Scarborough data or other data and fuse it with this database so that we can get more intricate kinds of target audiences.
So we also have a question about, that was, yes. Okay, so that question the person followed up with, and they were just asking if, for example, Hispanics 18 to 49 with a household income of 75K plus would be available. I can't speak to that specific demographic. That type of demographic should be available, but that may be too refined.
As far as I know right now, something like that is in there.
Yes, I can't say with 100% certainty that that's the case, because I do know that there is a certain point in which you drill down small enough, and there's not a large enough sample size for the data to work. So, or it's not in there at a certain level. But I believe that one is. Yeah.
That was one of the ones that was added. I'm almost positive.
Okay. Okay. And let's see.
We have 3 minutes.
Yeah. We have.
Did we get them on?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's all the questions that we're going to have time for. We had a couple others, but they seem to be addressed in other ways. So, Enzo?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There was one other question I think that we missed. Somebody was asking whether we will make the deck available.
Yeah.
The answer to that is yes. You could send me an email with any individual request for that. I'll be happy to send it to you. So Larry Hennessy, Hennessy, @tabonline.com. And with that, that's all the questions that we had. We hope everybody found this fruitful. Again, as Enzo said earlier, we welcome any input and feedback that you may have in terms of what we want to do with future webinars. So again, thank you very much. We appreciate your time.